Our next report comes from a wonderful young lady who I've spoken to, and I remember our phone conversation and thinking, she's so strong to have gone through the things that she's gone through and continue to do the same thing she does every day. She's far stronger than she realises. In the beginning, she didn't want to share this experience with anybody outside of a private conversation, but things have changed now for her, and she was happy for me to go ahead and share this with you. And it's entitled "The Neighbour Saw a Giant Dog Running Towards Our Back Door." And it's the tale of a girl who's seen something for a number of years, and the confusion that comes with that. It's not something you can just say, at school or to your friends or someone at uni. You kind of carry it yourself. She said, back in 2006, my dad was sadly diagnosed with terminal cancer. I think this was also the year I began seeing the Dogman. I'm not sure if this is when I first noticed him. After school, my normal routine was to get changed and have a quick cuppa, do some homework while dinner was being made, and then take our dogs out for a quick walk. There was a field directly opposite our house with a railway line at the far end of it, which had a banking travelling the length of the field and beyond. It had a steel fencing, which was quite tall, as the banking was rather steep, and it was covered with some shrubbery and small trees. The field was mostly disused back then. The grass would grow up to about hip high, and it was rarely cut. I only ever remember it being cut in recent years. Shrubbery and trees surrounded this boggy patch and the pond at the bottom near the fencing. The field was ideal for us to walk the dogs. We would still stay close to the fences though, as we didn't want to ruin a crop, just in case. We had a Labrador and a Lab Cross, both medium to large dogs, and rather friendly, without being scared of anything. They'd bark for the doorbell, but only play growl with each other, unless there was an aggression shown to one of their humans. I remember when I was talking to her and I said to her, do you rescue animals? Are you very good with animals? And she said, well, yeah, actually I do. And, I've walked dogs as a job and I've always been animals and horses and things. She said, in the evening, after people and animals had been fed, the dogs would go on another walk, about 7 or 8 p.m. And then a last walk, usually between 10 and 11. We all took turns taking the dogs out. But due to my dad's illness, sometimes he just couldn't. And I took on most of that responsibility. One evening, it was still light out. I believe it was September time, probably somewhere between 7 and 8 p.m. The sun was setting, and it was kind of a yellowy orange, and you could see it on the sky. It was beautiful. I walked across the field with the dogs, and the dogs began growling towards the bottom of the field. And I wasn't sure what they were growling at until I saw a tall, dark figure. The figure was standing quite far down the field, so I couldn't see any features. However, I did know that they were much taller than me. I recall how high the grass was and thinking, how could the dogs even see that guy? I thought this figure was an older teen, perhaps in a black hoodie. Suddenly, the figure dashed into the trees and shrubs surrounding the bog. I felt a little uneasy, and the dogs were barking now, so I took them back to the house. And I thought little of it. Later on in the year, I would need to take a little pocket torch with me at night as it was darker so I could see where I was going and to see where the dog's poop was and to untangle your leads, etc. I would often be walking the dogs in the pitch dark and they'd growl. And I'd shine my torch, but I didn't see anything. After the "that's not a cat" incident, I would see more. So one night we were walking along the boundaries of the bank on the railway side, and as usual, my little pocket torch, and the dogs growled up on the banking. Now there was a lot of overgrown plants along the fence lines, some nearly as tall as myself, and they were decaying in brittle stalks. I shone the light up on the banking, thinking there must be something up there. And I caught some amber red eye shine in the torchlight, and I thought, okay, it must be a cat or something on the banking. My brain had registered that the eyes were facing forwards and it was large. So I was mentally going through the list of indigenous predators which were likely suspects. I settled on a big house cat and it hadn't moved away immediately like a fox or a badger might. I had a Maine Coon cat, so I was comparing the size of it to his when the owner of the eyes moved from left to right. The eyes never left me as it moved. Whatever it was, it continued to look right at me as I continued to shine my little torch directly into its eyes. Looking back, it was no wonder it moved away, but I was utterly transfixed. I shook out of that pretty quickly once I realised that the fencing hadn't broken up my vision. It should have, if it was behind the fencing. Whatever it was on the same level ground that I was on, and it was tall, far taller than my 5'5". And that's when I turned tail and we all got back to the house. I was shaken, and I might have been mildly hysterical as I explained what had happened in the field. My parents were pretty calm about it. They did say I could take the dogs into the back garden at night from then on, or Mum would come with me to the field. So that's what we did. When it was dark, we went out with the dogs in the back garden. We went into the field together. Sometimes we'd see eye shine, and if the dogs growled, we would head back in. We gradually used the back garden more until we only used the field in the daytime. For a short time, nothing untoward happened. Just long enough for my guard to get let down. I'm just not sure about that, but that was the feeling I had. For context, standing at the bottom of our garden, there's a shed on the left with a small veg patch directly behind it. And there's a larger patch of gravel and a dogwood tree and a large dark leaf shrub of some kind. We have a larger vegetable patch behind that, and then some grass with more trees and lilac. A long plain grass lawn on the right and a small path between the lawn and the vegetable patches. One night I didn't make it very far up the path before the dogs ran back to me and cowered at my legs. I was a little put out by that. These dogs were cowering behind my knees. That's normal. They would never do that. As I got closer to the dogwood tree, they seemed to melt further away. The moon was full that night, so I hadn't bothered bringing my torch. I thought I could see a shape hiding in the trees, which wasn't very mature then. It only stood about 9 feet at the most, and it retained a lot of bushy twigs. I spoke aloud. "Who's there? I can see you." Then some gravel crunched and a twig snapped. The figure seemed to be moving behind the small tree. "I can hear you," I said. I should mention I was a bit of a stroppy brat, even as a teen, and I was beginning to feel ticked off that some weirdo was in my garden. A breeze in the otherwise still and silent night brought with it the scent of wet dog fur, unmistakable for any dog owner. "I can smell you," I announced softly, and just then the figure bounded away from the tree, away from me, and towards the fence. They leapt the 4-foot fence so gracefully they may as well have just stepped over it. And this is when I got a really good look at what it was hiding in our garden. Standing about 7 feet tall at least, it looked to be covered in dark fur, but it had a man's torso and human-like arms, just longer. It had some scary-looking weaponized hands, and its mouth was slightly ajar as it loped, and I saw teeth. Lots of teeth. Lots of long, sharp-looking teeth. I noticed its legs looked wrong. They were backwards, like a canine's hind leg. I must have only been 6 feet away, if not closer, before it bounded away. This thing went wide along the fence line in our neighbour's garden. I found out the next morning he'd bought a lot of timber and it was placed there. It then hopped the fence back into our garden as it disappeared into a mass of shadows surrounding the lilac bush. I know this next part was dumb. Hindsight is 20/20, and I 100% do not recommend what I did next. I don't know if it was teenage hormones or a fight-or-flight instinct, but all I knew was that my life was falling apart as it was, and I was filled with self-protective instincts in the surge of adrenaline. I stalked up to that lavender bush and I growled like some dog imitating demon-possessed child, and I said, "If you ever hurt my dogs, I will kill you." I then growled again for good measure, and I stalked back along the path, giving this thing my back. Stupid and sloppy, she says. We all react in different ways, and I think she should give herself a break on that. There is not many people who were brave enough to do what that young girl did then. I certainly was not. I turned around and left my friend for dead and ran screaming. I wish I'd have had her backbone back then. She said, by the time I got to the living room, I was shaking and panting. The dogs had their tails firmly curled between their legs, and I was in full-blown hysterics. I explained to my parents what I'd just seen, what I could only describe as a werewolf. I noticed their exchange of looks, and they immediately began to placate me. My mum said, we know, we've been seeing it for a while, but it won't hurt you. Just don't communicate with it and pretend it doesn't exist. Well, hadn't that ship bloody sailed? My mum also admitted that she thought it was something up in a tree when she'd be taking the dogs out in the back garden and she caught eyes shine up high. I thought she meant how tall it was, but after hearing some other people's experiences, perhaps it really was, sitting up in the tree. My dad subtly interrogated me and he made remarks about its snout. Was it like this, like a greyhound but wider? And he'd drawn on the margins of the Mirror newspaper to show me what he meant. My dad was the biggest sceptic you could meet, but he moved an old coal bunker to where I'd seen it jump over the wall. I remember asking what he was doing, and he muttered something about it's not getting over that. Anyway, I began ignoring it mostly, and it became a lurker on the edges of my life. Something we didn't know what it was, but something that didn't seem to want to hurt us. My dad passed away in 2008, and life moved on. It has to. I moved out at 20 and moved in with my current partner in 2012. We adopted a dog that October, a big Mastiff cross, which weighed more than I did at the time, and it had behavioural problems. One night, I was walking it alone up a country lane for its last walk of many, and it began growling at some of the trees. I was a little spooked. I was suddenly aware that I was on a dark lane with a dog with behavioural problems, alone. I thought it was just a huge shrub that he was barking at, that maybe a cat or a badger was in it, and the dog was picking up on that. I realised that there was a drop behind the fencing, and that the shrub was just the top of a small tree, which sat behind the tall shrubs on our side of the fence. I was looking down at the dog's head as I tugged on his lead, when I saw a furry thigh emerge from the twiggy foliage, and it moved towards us. I did not look up. I swiveled my hips and I dragged the now snarling dog up the road. We had many problems with that dog, and despite having experts come to assess him and give us training plans, we had to give him back that December. He was a truly dangerous dog who would flip from the bestest boy ever to scary human and dog aggressive behaviour. I was not the first person he attacked while under our care, and it was not the first time. We did our best, and it tore us apart having to give him up at such short time. I'm digressing, she says. I'm sorry. Fast forward a few years, we had another dog, a Christmas puppy. He really was the bestest dog. Walking him, I'd have some deja vu. My dog would give a growl towards hedges or seemingly empty fields, and we'd hear twigs crunching behind a hedgerow next to us as we walked on the road, or I'd see eye shine about 6 feet off the ground. I had a feeling my old pal had found me and was joining in on our walkies. Unsettling as it was, I realised he'd ample opportunity to kill me, and he hadn't. So I began to sing to him when I walked up there without the dog. The singing helped relax me. When adrenaline would flood into my system, I'd hear a twig crunch and a little too close, which would bring on an overwhelming feeling of fear. I just sang louder. This is how things went on for a long time. My boyfriend didn't really believe it, but he'd hear twigs crunching and would eventually come to the conclusion that myself and my mum hadn't been having mass hallucinations, because that would mean that he also had them. That year was awful. I received some messages from a deranged neighbour, basically regarding how he would take me off the street and where my trousers would be when he'd finished with me. I don't particularly wish to write it out or share it. It's something I put behind me. My neighbour continued to live there, and as you can imagine, I was nervous from then on, walking up there past his house alone. But I had livestock to tend to, so I had to. One night, I was halfway there when I saw a torchlight in a lane behind me, and it filled me with complete fear. I was trembling, and I called out for Wolfie. Now, I'm either very unimaginative or I go way overboard when I give names to things. I don't know why I called out for him, but I did. I did it instinctively. I got to the gate and I waited. I didn't want to be trapped in a stable with him. I wanted the opportunity of space to get away. And as the bobbing torch neared, I could see that it was my partner. I was so relieved, but he looked a little squirrely. We hugged and I went inside the field and I did what I had to do. When I came out again, my boyfriend was pale. He said, "Something just breathed down my neck, and I swear something shadowed me the whole way up here." He'd been putting the twigs cracking on all of our walks as simple sheep in fields, nothing untoward, nothing scary. He didn't feel like that anymore. Having something breathe down his neck, he was now beginning to put two and two together, and he finally believed that I was not delusional. Since then, we've noticed a trend over our nearly 9 years together. Whenever I'm incredibly scared or upset, he shows up. After an accident I had in 2015, my partner has heard something softly growling and pacing around below our bedroom window as I lay in bed. I was bruised, beaten, and not with it due to the knock on their noggin. And a neighbour said that she saw a giant dog running towards our back garden when I returned from hospital last October. When my mum passed away last spring, I'd sit in the back garden at night and I'd cry by myself so I wouldn't bother my partner. He saw me crying enough during the day. I wanted to give him some space. I knew Wolfie was there. I heard him rustling the leaves on the hedge, or I'd see his shape behind the hedge or behind the shed watching me. I don't think he would hurt me, and he seems to understand that I find him physically terrifying to look at. I may have told him that he was scary looking one night, and he seems content to just follow us, but he lets us know he's there most times and keeps out of sight. I haven't seen him like when he was in Mum and Dad's back garden. Maybe one day I'll be brave enough and he will feel comfortable enough to show himself fully. I'm sorry this was so long, and I'm sure I'm missing parts out. There's just so much to fit in. I've seen a lot of odd things before, UFOs, paranormal events, but nothing I couldn't explain away without enough incentive. Although one UFO sighting I do remember is when Mum and Dad and I were watching the sky. We saw either the quickest helicopter known to man with the worst pilot, or a lost alien with a broken compass. I can explain away most things, but I can't explain Wolfie. On the 17th of the 3rd, 2021, she sent me an email, 12:48am. I just let the dogs out in the back garden, Deb, about 20 minutes ago, and I walked away to feed the cats, and by the time I'd poured food into their bowls, our 8-year-old collie was at my feet. He was looking scared, and he didn't want to go back out. So I went to check on our nearly 2-year-old retriever, and he was standing upright, as tall as he could get, standing against our fence and sniffing at the neighbour's hedge. The hedge is probably about 7-8 feet tall. He was completely engrossed in whatever he was doing, but I couldn't see as our outdoor light isn't very powerful. I shone my phone torch towards the hedge and he immediately started barking. He calmed down and came away, but my 8-year-old dog was hunkered in the kitchen, staring at me with wild eyes. He's currently hunkered down at my side of the bed and acting like someone's giving him a telling off. It could be nothing, but with the other dog's behaviour, I'm thinking it might have been a visit from my friend. Our next report comes from a young lady who said, "I saw your post on the phantom dog that was seen in Bolton, and I added my own story to the report. I had a similar experience to that girl, and I felt that the dog I saw was friendly. This happened in a Scottish border town that I would prefer to keep secret. When I was a teen, I was walking home late one evening from a visit to my older sister's house. And it was dark, and for safety reasons, I went through the main town as it was well lit. It was a weekend night, and I admit I was nervous the whole time I was walking in case I bumped into drunken people. After getting through the main part of town, I got near one of the churches that is in a less well-lit residential area. A huge wolfhound ran in front of me. It came from nowhere, and it kept stopping in the middle of the road. I was about 6 feet away from it, and it just stood there and stared at me. I've always been an animal lover, so after a wait, with no owner appearing within a few minutes, I was worried the dog was a stray, or that it had escaped someone's home without them knowing. So I spoke softly to the dog, and I walked a little closer, but it trotted away a little bit more. I stopped, thinking I was scaring it, and it stopped and looked back at me again. So I tried to approach it again, and the same thing happened. I was a bit wary, but because it was out on the road and I was worried about cars coming and it getting hurt, despite the fact that it was leading me away from the main street, I followed it and I went down past the little church. And it was the same pattern through the walk. Me trying to approach it, and it always staying just out of reach of me, and always stopping to look back at me while it waited for me to catch up. It led me to near the entrance of one of our local graveyards, and at that point I was like, oh heck, are you serious? I'm not following you in there. And as I was standing contemplating following the dog into the church, there was a massive ruckus from where I'd been going to walk home originally. There was a group of rowdy drunken men that must have been heading up the path I'd been intending to go down. And there were sounds of shouting and swearing and something hitting the bins that was on the street. And what sounded like a fight broke out between them. As I turned the other way, listening to the noisy men, I had no idea where the dog went. But when I looked back, it was gone. I like to think that it was a friendly guide who'd steered me away from trouble that night, and I'll never forget it. It was the biggest, greyest wolfhound I've ever seen. No collar that I could see, and it was always just out of reach. I know it could have been a real dog, but it was such a strange experience. It appeared before me, and it led me away from potential danger. It made no sound the whole time. I'm really thankful that I followed it. Whatever it was, I'm the sort of person who's kind of a skeptic, trying to find a rational explanation for everything, including the dog that I saw. And I can't explain that experience. I just cannot explain it. The graveyard it led me to has a path running through it, which I could have used as an alternative route home, but I was too scared to go through there in the dark. That's the reason I walked through the town. Have you ever heard any stories about orange glowing lights or objects at all in these creature sightings? My mum and I had a very strange experience with one that flew past us, literally right between us, and it vanished as we were walking one night. We both looked at each other and said, "Did you see that?" It was football-sized and bright orange. It flew past us at head height, faster than you can blink. There was no noise, no heat, no smoke trail, nothing. And it vanished, literally. This was a good few years back, and one I can't explain. We're both still baffled by it. It was shot right between us, like quite literally zoomed past our heads, and we was talking and walking, not 1 minute away from our house. Until next time, good night everyone.